Short is the story, long is the life.
Wukong's Archive presents Dalian Women's Volleyball Building. Hello everyone. Today I want to tell you about a place, Dalian, the Women's Volleyball Building. This story was told to me by a friend from Dalian. His surname is Zhou, he's from Lashunkou district in Dalian, and he worked in the city's sports commission system for over 20 years. He said his entanglement with that building stretched from the early 1990s all the way to the 2000s, more than a decade. Some things he saw with his own eyes. Some things he heard from old colleagues at the sports commission. And some things he found in old newspapers at the city archives. I can't judge what's true and what isn't. I'm just relaying what he told me. Dalian is not like other cities. If you look at Dalian from above, you'll notice the city has an elongated shape. It sits at the southernmost tip of China's Liaodong Peninsula, surrounded by the sea on three sides, connected to the mainland only on its northern edge. Some people call Dalian the Pearl of the North, but old Zhou said Dalian is more like a ship anchored at the meeting point of the Yellow Sea and the Bohai Sea, looking like it's about to set sail at any moment.
Dalian's history is complicated. The city's modern history is almost entirely a history of colonization. In 1898, the Russians forcibly leased Lushuan, Port Arthur, and Dalian, and began building a port and city on the foundation of a small fishing village called Qingnawa. The Russians planned Dalian as their most important port in the Far East. They built docks, railways, and churches. The entire city was designed in a European style. In 1905, the Russo-Japanese War ended with Russia's defeat, and Japan took over. The Japanese ruled Dalian for 40 years until 1945. During those 4 decades, Dalian became completely Japanized. The street names were Japanese, schools taught in Japanese, the port shipped coal and grain from Manchuria to Japan. Dalian became one of Japan's core colonial cities in northeast China.
But neither the Russian nor the Japanese colonial period left the deepest scar on the memory of Dalian's people. There was something else.
In 1894, the First Sino-Japanese War. After the Japanese army captured Lashunkou, they carried out a 4-day, 3-night massacre. Over 20,000 Chinese soldiers and civilians were slaughtered. Men, women, elderly, children without mercy. The streets were piled with corpses. Blood flowed through the gaps between the stone slabs. Japanese soldiers searched house by house, killing everyone they found. The elderly, women, children, not one was spared. In 4 days, the entire city of Lushuan went from a bustling port to a city of the dead. According to contemporary Western journalists, the bodies in the streets of Lushuan were piled higher than a man's head. Blood literally flowed like a river. The stench of rotting corpses filled the entire city. Fewer than 100 people survived those 4 days, hiding among the dead, surviving by drinking bloody water and eating the flesh of the deceased. The New York World reporter Creelman wrote at the time, "This is not war. This is slaughter." The Japanese soldiers used their bayonets to open the belly of every living person, regardless of whether that person was man or woman, old or young.
People from Dalian grow up knowing this history. When I was a child, the school organized trips to Lushuan. Standing in front of the Wanzhou Memorial, the teacher told us that the remains of over 20,000 victims were buried here. I didn't really understand back then. I just thought 20,000 was a very big number. Later, when I grew up, I stood on Bayou Mountain in Lashunkou and looked down, the entire city spread out before me, mountains meeting the sea, a beautiful view. But suddenly I remembered that number, 20,000. 20,000 people. 20,000 corpses piled on the streets of the city, what kind of image was that? Bayou Mountain is now a peace park, planted with cherry blossom trees. Every spring when the cherry blossoms bloom, the mountain is covered in pink and white petals, like a snowfall from afar. But old Joe said that every time he stands on Bayou Mountain and looks down, he doesn't see cherry blossoms. He sees the blood of 20,000 people. He said that from that day on, every time he walked the streets of Dalian, he couldn't help asking himself one question: what was this place where I'm standing now, 100 years ago? Farmland? A village? A graveyard? Or a mass grave? The entire city of Dalian was built on top of bones. Beneath every inch of soil, there may be the souls of the forgotten dead. The only question is, what exactly is your piece of ground built on top of?
In 1992, old Joe didn't know any of this yet. He was 22 years old, freshly graduated from Shenyang Institute of Physical Education, assigned to work at the Sports Commission. He didn't know much about Dalian's history yet. By the time he did, many things were already too late. The women's volleyball building is in Dalian's Zhongshan district, near Labor Park.
The first time I saw that building was in 1992. On my first day reporting for work, the director took me on a tour of the Sports Commission's facilities. When we got near Labor Park, the director pointed at a gray building and said, "That's the women's volleyball team's dormitory and training hall."
Old Joe took a look at the building. 6 stories. Gray concrete exterior. Square and boxy, completely without decoration. It was the most ordinary kind of 1980s architecture, the kind that wouldn't attract attention in any city in any corner of the world. The only thing that struck him as slightly odd was that the windows were exceptionally small. Each window was narrow, like a slit, embedded in the gray concrete wall. From a distance, the whole building looked like a face without expression, squinting at you.
I later found out that the narrow window design was to save on building materials. In 1980s building standards, the smaller the window area, the lower the cost. But I always felt that the designer of that building may have unintentionally done the right thing. The smaller those windows were, the less the people inside could see. If the windows had been bigger, what the people inside saw might have been even more terrifying.
Old Joe didn't think much of it at the time. After getting his dormitory assignment, he was placed in the administrative division of the Sports Commission Training Department. He dealt with team leaders and coaches every day. The women's volleyball training hall wasn't far from his office, and he often heard the girls training when he passed by, the sound of spiking, whistles, coaches shouting, all drifting out through the training hall windows. A schedule was posted on the training hall door: morning exercises 6 to 8 a.m., technical training 9 to 12 a.m., tactical training 2 to 5 p.m., study sessions 7 to 9 p.m. Over 10 hours of training every day, almost no weekends or holidays.
Dalian's women's volleyball team wasn't the best in Liaoning province. The strongest was the provincial team, but Dalian's team was decent. They'd trained several prospects for the provincial team. Most of the girls were 17 or 18, the oldest no more than 22 or 23, in the prime of their youth. Their daily life was like this: training hall, dormitory, cafeteria, a triangle of routine. Their youth was essentially spent inside that gray building.
Old Joe later reflected that those girls had left their families to join the sports team, spending more time with their teammates than with their own families. The hardships they endured, outsiders never saw. In summer, the training hall had no air conditioning. Temperatures could reach over 40 degrees Celsius. Just standing still would make you sweat, but they had to run, jump, and spike. Training sessions lasted half a day. Their clothes would be soaked through, wrung out, and put back on. In winter, the dormitory heating was inadequate. By midnight the pipes went cold. The girls would double up their blankets and still shiver. But they never complained.
Their goal was simple: train hard, get into the provincial team, get into the national team. That was the best Chulu way out for an ordinary kid in that era. Many of their mothers were laid-off textile workers. Many of their fathers were dock workers or steel mill workers. They came to play volleyball to change their fate through their own efforts.
Old Joe wasn't particularly close with the girls, but they'd greet each other when they met. A few players left a deep impression on him. One was number 1, the outside hitter, from Dandong. She was 1.82 meters tall and spiked with incredible ferocity. Everyone called her Big Dan. Her style was aggressive, back row approach, front row heavy spike. Her spike once swelled up an opposing libero's hand during a match. The coach said she was a once-in-a-decade talent for Dalian volleyball. Number 5 was the setter, a local Dalian girl. Not very tall, but her hands were incredibly skilled. Her sets were steady and precise. The coach said she was a born setter. Number 9 was the libero, the shortest but the most agile, the kind that flew around the court. Everyone called her Little Bit. Her reaction speed was extraordinary. The coach said her movement was instinct. Before the ball even landed, she was already there. The three of them formed the backbone of different positions. The coach often said, Big Dan spikes, number 5 sets, Little Bit receives. That's the soul of our Dalian women's volleyball team. In the autumn of 1992, everything was still normal. Life at the Sports Commission went on as usual. The girls trained, ate, and slept. Old Joe wrote documents and processed paperwork at his office, occasionally stopping by the training hall to watch for a while. He thought life was ordinary, but good. Then in the spring of 1993, things began to change. One morning in March 1993, Old Joe was passing by the women's volleyball dormitory when he saw an ambulance parked downstairs. Several people in white coats were loading a stretcher. On the stretcher lay someone covered with a white sheet. An arm was exposed beneath the sheet, and on that arm was an elbow pad, the kind the volleyball girls wore during training.
I recognized that elbow pad. It was Big Dan's. She had a left elbow injury and always wore the same gray elbow pad during training, its edges worn and frayed. I thought about that image many times afterward, that arm sticking out from under the white sheet, still wearing the elbow pad, as if she was ready to go to training. She was wearing it even in death.
He ran over to ask the coach what happened. The coach was a man in his 40s named Lou, who had worked at the Dalian Sports Commission for most of his career. Old Joe said he had never seen Lao Lu look like that. His face was ashen, his lips purple, his whole body seemed drained of life.
Big Dan. She's gone. Last night.
Gone? What do you mean gone?
In the early morning, her roommate found her unresponsive. They couldn't wake her, couldn't get any reaction. They called an ambulance, but by the time she got to the hospital, she was already gone. The doctor said sudden cardiac arrest.
Big Dan was 21 years old. From Dandong, Liaoning. 1.82 meters tall, muscular, healthy enough to spike for 3 hours straight. She had no history of heart disease. She'd been examined countless times. Her EKG was always normal. Every year the Sports Commission did physical exams, and Big Dan's indicators were excellent, far better than most people her age. 21 years old. Sudden cardiac arrest.
The official explanation from the Sports Commission was sudden cardiac death. Medically it could happen, an extremely rare event, occasionally occurring in young people after intense exercise. Everyone was sad, but no one questioned it much. Big Dan's parents came from Dandong. Her mother cried so hard she couldn't stand, clutching Big Dan's belongings, refusing to let go. Her father was a quiet working man who silently handled all the arrangements without shedding a single tear. But Old Joe noticed that when the father left, he looked back at the women's volleyball dormitory. He stood there looking at it for a long time, then crouched down and sat on the ground for a while before finally getting up and walking away. He didn't say anything, but that look, Old Joe never forgot it. It was a father's look. Full of grief, full of anger, and something else.
The Sports Commission handled the aftermath. They gave the family compensation money. They held a small memorial service. Everything was done by the book. Big Dan's dormitory room was sealed off. Her belongings were packed and sent back to Dandong. The volleyball training didn't stop, but now without their outside hitter, the formation had to be reorganized.
But from that day on, the atmosphere of that building changed. It wasn't the building itself that changed, it was how people felt. The girls became quiet. Before, during training breaks, they'd laugh and joke around. Now during breaks, they sat by the court drinking water, not talking, their eyes empty. Coach Lu also became quieter than before. After training he'd leave immediately. Before, he'd sometimes eat with the team and chat, but now, as soon as training ended, he was gone.
Old Joe said he thought everyone just hadn't recovered from Big Dan's death yet. They'd get over it. But he was wrong. Late one night in late March, Old Joe was working overtime until after 9. When he passed by the women's volleyball dormitory, he heard crying coming from inside the building. Not just one person crying, many people, as if a whole crowd was weeping. The sound was faint, ethereal, coming from a particular window. He stood downstairs listening for a while and realized the crying wasn't coming from any one room. It was seeping out of the building itself. From the walls. From the gaps in the concrete. From somewhere underground.
My back went cold instantly. That sound was not human crying. I can't explain it, the crying was too synchronized, like it was being played from a recording. And the pitch, it wasn't the way Chinese people wail at funerals. Chinese crying has rhythm, ups and downs. That sound was very sharp, very flat, with no ups and downs. Like a group of people making the same sound at the same frequency.
Old Joe said he didn't dwell on it. He hurried back to his own dormitory. He didn't sleep a wink that night. The next morning, he went to ask the gatekeeper, old Wang. Wang was 63 years old, had worked as a gatekeeper at the Sports Commission for over 20 years, and had witnessed the building from its construction through its use. Old Joe asked Old Wang if he'd heard any sounds the night before. Old Wang looked at him, didn't say anything, and just shook his head.
I later found out I wasn't the first person to hear that crying.
In April 1993, the second team member had an incident. This time it was number 5, the setter, a local Dalian girl, 20 years old. She collapsed during training. She wasn't in an intense match, just a routine spike drill. She jumped up, spiked the ball, and when she landed, she didn't regain her balance. She fell straight to the ground. Her teammates thought she'd twisted her ankle. They ran over to help her up, and found her eyes rolled back, foam at her mouth, her body convulsing like an epileptic seizure. At the hospital, the doctor diagnosed epilepsy. But number 5 had never had epilepsy before. Her medical records showed everything normal, her nervous system was fine. There was no family history of epilepsy. The doctor said it might be stress-induced epilepsy, caused by a strong physical stimulus. But what stimulus could she have received on the training court? She spiked a ball and landed, that was it. No one could answer that question. Number 5 spent a week in the hospital. When she was discharged, she was a completely different person. Before, she'd been the liveliest on the team, always laughing and joking. The coach called her the team's joy button. Afterward, she wouldn't talk to anyone. She'd stare blankly at one spot. Sometimes she'd suddenly scream, crouch down and cover her head, shouting, "Don't come near me, don't come near me, don't come near me." No one knew what she was seeing. When she screamed, the sound became very sharp, completely different from her normal speaking voice.
Once I heard her scream in the hallway. That sound reminded me of the crying I'd heard that night, the same frequency, the same pitch. That sound wasn't coming from a human throat. It was coming from somewhere very, very deep.
Coach Lu felt something was wrong. After discussing with the sports commission leadership, he sent number 5 home. Her parents took her to a major hospital in Shenyang for a complete workup, EEG, CT scan, MRI, every test they could do. All the results came back normal. The doctors said there was nothing organically wrong with her body. A psychiatrist also examined her and said she showed no typical psychiatric symptoms. Then why did she scream? Why did she say, "Don't come near me"? What was she seeing? No one ever found out. What happened to number 5 afterward? Old Joe said he asked around. After she went home, she never returned to the volleyball team. For 2 years she stayed in that state, wouldn't communicate, had to be fed, occasionally would suddenly scream, the sound carrying through the entire building. Her mother later told the neighbors that sometimes her daughter would suddenly say one complete sentence. It was always the same sentence, "They're all down there. They're asking me to come down." Later, word had it that her family sent her to relatives in the countryside for a change of environment and quiet rest. Whether she ever recovered, no one ever heard anything about her again. Old Joe said he sometimes thinks about number 5. That once lively, laughing girl, the last thing she left to this city was the image of a crouched figure screaming on the ground. In May, the 3rd team member had an incident. This time it was number 9, Little Bit, 19 years old. She was the youngest on the team and also the most talented. The coach said her reaction speed was a once-in-a-decade level, and she was destined for the provincial team. In spring 1993, the provincial team's transfer order had already come down. She was to report to Shenyang in June. She was so happy. She told her teammates that once she got to the provincial team, she'd train hard and try to make the national team. Everyone was happy for her. That night she called her family. Her mother cried on the phone, saying her daughter had a bright future. Little Bit cried too. On the evening of May 17, Little Bit's roommate found her bed empty. The blanket was folded neatly, as if it had never been slept in. The roommate thought she'd gone to the bathroom. After waiting half an hour, she went to check, no one there. She waited another half hour. Still no sign of Little Bit. Panicking, the roommate woke the others. They searched the entire building, no sign of her. Gatekeeper Old Wang said he hadn't seen anyone go out. The dormitory's front door was locked after 11 p.m. Only Old Wang had the key. He said he'd been awake from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. and hadn't heard any sound of the lock being opened. The lock on the door was intact, untouched. But Little Bit was gone. The sports commission called the police. The police investigated for 3 days. They checked nearby surveillance cameras, but in those days, there were almost no cameras on Dalian streets. Nothing was captured. The police entered the dormitory, searched every room, no signs of anything unusual. No signs of a struggle. No signs of forced entry. Little Bit's personal belongings were still neatly in her dormitory, her clothes, her toiletries, the portable cassette player she'd saved up to buy. Her father had given her 200 yuan when he visited, which she'd been reluctant to spend. It was still under her pillow. The money was still there. The police investigated every possibility. Jumped out the window? No traces on the ground outside. Ran away with someone? No one had seen her socializing with anyone. Kidnapped? The sports commission compound had a gatekeeper. No outsiders could enter. A 19-year-old girl simply vanished into thin air. The police's final conclusion was, missing person, cause unknown.
After Little Bit disappeared, the volleyball team's training completely stopped. The remaining girls were too afraid to stay in the dormitory. At night they squeezed into the neighboring table tennis training hall to sleep on the floor. The sports commission leadership had no choice. They arranged temporary accommodation at a nearby guest house. By June, the Dalian women's volleyball team was formally disbanded. The remaining girls went home. Some transferred to other sports schools. Some quit sports entirely. I saw one of the former team members later. She said she never played volleyball again after that. Every time she walked into a volleyball court, she felt that from every direction, from the walls, there were eyes watching her.
That gray 6-story building sat empty. After the building was empty, old Joe began noticing things he'd never noticed before.
I worked in administration. The sports commission leadership asked me to organize the women's volleyball dormitory archives. I went to the archives and looked through all the historical documents about that building. I found some very interesting things.
The building was built in 1985, originally approved as the Dalian Sports School Comprehensive Building. But old Joe discovered that from design to construction, the building had gone through 3 different plans. The original design had the building built underground, not just a basement, but the entire building half submerged. According to the original plan, what would have been the ground floor was actually 2 levels below ground, with only 3 stories visible above. For reasons unknown, the plan was later changed to a 6-story above-ground building. Old Joe found a geological survey report from 1984. It clearly stated, undefined fill material exists beneath this site. Deep excavation to native soil layer is recommended before construction. Undefined fill material.
I asked an old engineer who'd worked on the construction. He was nearly 70, his hair completely white. When I asked about it, the old engineer frowned and was silent for a very long time. Then he said, "That place, when we were digging the foundation, we dug up bones. A lot of bones. Not 1 or 2, we filled up a truck."
Old Joe asked, were they human bones?
I couldn't tell. Too much time had passed. They were all broken. At that depth and that degree of fragmentation, they'd been buried for at least 50 or 60 years. But looking at the quantity, it couldn't have been animals. I asked, what happened afterward? Afterward? Nobody mentioned it. The construction schedule was tight. The city government was pushing for completion. The construction continued. Those bones were mixed into the concrete and poured into the foundation. The people above went about their business. Nobody knew, so nobody was scared. When I heard that, a picture suddenly appeared in my mind. I stood on that floor in my office every day. Under the concrete floor beneath my feet, how many people's bones were mixed in? Those bones were now part of the gray cement, part of this building's foundation. Every step I took might have been stepping on a skeleton from hundreds of years ago.
He later researched the history of Dalian during the Sino-Japanese War and the Japanese occupation period. He found detailed records of the Lushuan massacre, over 20,000 people killed, with a large number of bodies buried or burned on the spot by the Japanese army. Although a large-scale collection of remains was conducted afterward, it happened several months later. Many bodies had already decomposed beyond recognition. A vast number of skeletons were believed to have mixed with the soil, impossible to separate.
The Japanese army later dug several large pits near Lushanku, randomly dumping the scattered remains in and covering them with dirt. The locations of those pits were never recorded. Old Joe also discovered something even more horrifying. Between 1937 and 1945, the Japanese Guangdong Army operated a secret epidemic prevention research institute in Dalian, ostensibly for epidemiological research, but actually a facility for human experimentation. According to Old Joe's investigation, the site of this institute was less than 800 meters northwest of Labor Park. When Japan surrendered, they destroyed a large amount of experimental data and equipment. But they couldn't dispose of the bodies of their human experiment victims. Before evacuating, the Guangdong Army burned and buried the bodies on site. If the bones beneath the women's volleyball building weren't victims of the Sino-Japanese War, Could they be victims of Japanese human experimentation? And if so, how many people were there?
I'm not sure. There's no evidence to confirm either theory. But I do know one thing: beneath the city of Dalian, too many souls lie buried that should never have been forgotten. Every generation of rulers left their mark on Dalian, and they also left their dead. Russian, Japanese, Chinese piled layer upon layer underground, like an open history book with every page written in death.
He later went to the Wanzhong Memorial in Lushuan and talked with the staff there for a long time. They told him that after the Sino-Japanese War, although the Japanese army ostensibly did the work of burying the bodies, they never took it seriously. A huge number of bodies were buried on the spot. Some pits held dozens, some held hundreds. Decades later, as Dalian's urban construction kept expanding, construction crews frequently dug up skeletal remains. But this kind of thing was generally not reported in the news. Local governments didn't want to cause panic, and construction companies didn't want to delay their projects. The unearthed bones were reburied elsewhere or simply mixed into construction waste and disposed of. No one investigated. No one asked questions.
When I heard that, I did one thing: I went to the Sports Commission leadership and requested a transfer from that position. I didn't tell them the real reason. I just said I wanted to change departments.
The leadership agreed. But it wasn't over yet. In the spring of 1994, the Sports Commission leadership decided to put the women's volleyball dormitory back into use. Leaving it empty for a year was too wasteful. And after the volleyball team disbanded, other sports teams were short on dormitory space. The leadership decided to convert the building into a general dormitory for the track and field and weightlifting teams. The first month went by normally. The second month, a weightlifting team member ran out of his dormitory in the middle of the night. He stood barefoot on the sports field, his whole body shaking. When they found him and asked what was wrong, he said he'd had a dream. In the dream he was lying on his dormitory bed, and there was a face on the ceiling above him.
That face was flat, like it had been pressed by something. The features were twisted, all in the wrong positions. The eyes were crooked, the mouth was slanted, the nose looked like it had been squeezed to one side. The face floated down from above me, closer and closer, until it pressed against my face. I could feel that the skin was ice cold, like meat just taken out of a freezer. I wanted to scream but couldn't make a sound. I wanted to move but couldn't. I just lay there, feeling that ice-cold face pressed against mine for a long, long time. Then I woke up and found myself already standing on the sports field. I have absolutely no memory of getting out of bed, going downstairs, walking through the hallway, or opening that locked door.
Old Joe said that team member was reassigned to a different room afterward, but he still had nightmares. After every nightmare, he'd wake up in the middle of the night and find himself standing somewhere outside the building, with no memory of how he got there. Eventually, he couldn't continue weightlifting. His mental state was too deteriorated. During training he couldn't even grip the barbell properly. Once he almost dropped it on himself. At the end of 1994, he applied for early retirement and went back to his hometown. Before leaving, he said something strange to his teammates: "That building is not for people to live in." When asked what he meant, he didn't explain further. In the third month, 2 female track and field athletes simultaneously began having the same dream. They hadn't discussed it with each other, their dormitories were 3 rooms apart, and they weren't even in the same training group, but they described exactly the same thing. At the end of the dormitory corridor stood a woman, wearing old-fashioned clothes, a dark blue slanted button jacket, black cloth pants, a gray cloth wrapped around her head, the kind of outfit worn by ordinary working women during the Republican era. She was facing the wall, her back to the corridor.
They wanted to walk closer to see who that woman was, but every step was impossible. They wanted to shout, but no sound would come out. Then the woman slowly began to turn her head, but there was no face. Her entire face was smooth, As if all the features had been erased, like a peeled hard-boiled egg, bare, featureless, nothing at all. At that same point, both of them woke up in terror at the exact same moment.
When the track and field coach heard about this, he went directly to the sports commission director. The coach was surnamed Wu, 40 years old, nearly 20 years of coaching experience, a practical man who never talked about supernatural things.
That building cannot be lived in. Director Zhao, I'm not a superstitious person, but over a dozen of my athletes are simultaneously having psychological problems. This is not a coincidence. If you think I'm wrong, you go spend a night there yourself and find out.
The sports commission director was surnamed Zhao, in his 50s, a former soldier who had fought in the Sino-Vietnamese War, famous for not believing in superstition.
Superstitious nonsense. Athletes have stress, they have nightmares. It's normal.
Director Zhao actually went and spent the night there. When he came out the next morning, his expression was not good. Someone asked him how it went. He said, "It was okay. I just didn't sleep well." But old Joe noticed that Director Zhao took a folding cot from his office closet and slept in his office for over a month after that, never going home. His wife called to ask why, and he said, "Work has been busy lately." No one ever found out what Director Zhao experienced that night in the women's volleyball dormitory. He never talked about it. But old Joe later heard from Director Zhao's driver that Joe had spoken about it once. After coming out of the building that night, Zhao sat in the car, was silent for a long time, and then said one sentence to the driver. He said, "That building has something wrong with it."
Director Zhao only said that one sentence and never mentioned it again. But I'd been with him for 7 or 8 years, and I'd never seen him with that expression. He'd been on the battlefield. He'd seen dead people. He was not a man who scared easily. But that day when he spoke, his voice was trembling. It wasn't a normal speaking voice, it was a sound squeezed out from his throat.
In the summer of 1994, the Sports Commission decided to permanently abandon the women's volleyball building. The track and field and weightlifting teams all moved out. The building's door was locked with a chain. Even after the building was locked, the rumors about it didn't stop. Although old Joe had been transferred, his new office wasn't far from Labor Park, and he occasionally passed by the women's volleyball building. He noticed a strange phenomenon. Even though the building was abandoned, some of the boards covering the windows had been removed. Looking in from outside, the dark window openings looked like a dozen eyes, each staring in a different direction. In the summer of 1996, some neighborhood children sneaked into the building to explore. They were inside for less than 10 minutes before running out, their faces pale with terror. The children said that when they reached the second floor, they heard women crying upstairs. Not just one, many women crying together. And the crying didn't seem to be coming from any particular room upstairs, it was coming from the walls, from beneath the floorboards, from the ceiling, all at the same time. The children said they tried to run, but their legs wouldn't obey, as if something had nailed them to the floor. After a long while, they could move again, and they ran out like mad. After that, no neighborhood children ever dared to go near that building again. In 1997, a homeless man spent a night in the women's volleyball building hallway. When he came out the next morning, he kept repeating one phrase over and over. Old Joe happened to be passing by and heard the homeless man saying the same words repeatedly. "There are people under the ground. There are people under the ground. It's full of people down there." Old Joe called out to him, but the man didn't respond. He kept chanting those 4 words as he walked along the road, his voice growing fainter and fainter. Old Joe said he remembered those 4 words for the rest of his life. In 1998, the Sports Commission considered demolishing the women's volleyball building and building a parking lot in its place. A construction team was hired, and bulldozers were brought to the site. But the day before work was to begin, the construction foreman came to see the sports commission leadership and said they weren't going to take this job. The leadership asked why.
My workers say there's something in that building.
The leadership asked what.
The workers wouldn't say why. But dozens of them, not a single one was willing to take this job. We've been in construction for decades. We've seen all kinds of sites, cemeteries, slaughterhouses, chemical plants, we've demolished them all. But this time was different. Last night the workers came to me as a group. They said if I forced them to demolish this building, they'd all quit on the spot.
The leadership had no choice. They hired another construction company. The foreman of the second company came to inspect the site. He stood in front of the building, walked around it, went into the first-floor hallway. When he came out, he asked the sports commission leadership one question: was something buried beneath this building? The leadership didn't answer. The second company also refused the job. The demolition plan was shelved. That building remained standing where it was. Its gray concrete walls were covered in cracks. The plaster peeled off piece by piece, revealing dark red bricks beneath. In front of the building, weeds grew tall. From spring to autumn, the grass got higher every year, swallowing the chain and lock at the entrance. In winter, the dry yellow stalks rustled in the wind, sounding like many people whispering secrets to each other. Old Joe was later transferred to the Provincial Sports Commission and left Dalian. But his entanglement with that building didn't end there. In 2003, he met a former colleague from the Dalian Sports Commission in Shenyang. They drank together until late at night. After several rounds, the conversation turned back to the women's volleyball building.
Did you know they did a survey on that building later?
Old Joe asked what kind of survey.
In 1999, Dalian City was doing urban planning. They needed to assess the old buildings around Labor Park, which ones to demolish and which to keep. The assessment company sent a geological survey team to do an underground structures survey on the women's volleyball building. They drilled 6 boreholes around the building. The deepest one went down 8 meters.
The survey results shocked everyone.
Beneath that building, at a depth of about 4 to 6 meters, there was a large area of irregular object accumulation. The density was uneven, the shapes irregular, it couldn't be explained by natural geology. The survey engineer's preliminary assessment was a large accumulation of human bones.
Old Joe asked how many in total.
The survey engineer told me privately that based on the density and the area, at least 500 bodies.
500. The two of them were silent for a very long time.
I can't imagine that image. Just 4 meters beneath the ground beneath that building where I worked for so many years, more than 500 skeletons lying layer upon layer. Every day I walked around in that building, attending meetings, writing documents, drinking water, going to the bathroom. 4 meters beneath the concrete floor beneath my feet was a bed of bones. More than 500 people.
Who were those people? Victims of the Lushuan massacre? The residents of a village that disappeared during the Sino-Japanese War? Victims of Japanese human experimentation? Or the remains of some unknown mass execution site from the Japanese occupation period? No one knows. Perhaps no one will ever know.
The city of Dalian was destined, from the day it was founded, to have too many secrets buried beneath it. 20,000 people died in the Lushuan massacre of 1894. 300,000 died in the Nanjing massacre of 1937. Although Dalian never experienced a massacre of Nanjing's scale, in the 40 years of Japanese occupation, how many unknown horrors were buried underground? Chinese corpses, Soviet Red Army martyrs, fallen Japanese Guangdong Army soldiers, anti-Manchurian resistance fighters executed in secret. The 500 skeletons beneath this building may have been just the most insignificant part of the secrets buried beneath Dalian.
Old Joe later asked someone to look into the land use history of that site. During the Qing dynasty, the area around Labor Park was wilderness north of Lashunku, with a few scattered fishing villages. After the Sino-Japanese War, the area was occupied by the Japanese army and became a mass grave where the war dead and executed were casually buried. When the Russians took Dalian, the area was leveled for temporary military barracks. When the Japanese took over, it was designated as military land, its specific use unknown, but on Japanese military maps, the area was codenamed Area B-12, with no functional description.
After liberation, the area was assigned to the Sports Commission system, and some sports facilities were built there. Although the land had changed owners countless times, what lay beneath the ground had never been truly cleared. For meters of soil can cover the smell and the sight, but it cannot cover history and memory.
In 2005, Old Joe visited that building for the last time. He said he was just passing through the area. He was in Dalian on business. After finishing, he could have taken a direct flight back to Shenyang. But something made him tell the taxi driver to take a detour past Labor Park. He wanted to see it one more time. The women's volleyball building was still there. The gray exterior wall was even older now. A large patch of plaster had peeled off, revealing the dark red bricks beneath. Some of the window boards had rotted, hanging crookedly from their frames, exposing dark empty openings. The open space in front was overgrown with weeds, the tallest reaching knee height. The chain and lock at the entrance were rusted, reddish-brown rust dripping down the chain like drops of dried blood. The wind blew down from the rooftop, passing through those dark window openings, making a sobbing sound. As if the building itself were crying.
I stood in front of the building for a long time. I don't know what I was looking at. Maybe I wanted to confirm the building was still the same as before. Maybe I wanted to say goodbye. My history with this building spanned from 1992 to 2005, 13 years. Big Dan died. Number 5 went mad. Little Bit disappeared. The volleyball team disbanded. I was transferred. Everyone who had lived and worked in that building was either gone, scattered, or no longer alive. Only the building remained standing, like a silent guardian, locking all its secrets between concrete and steel.
He stood there for about 10 minutes. It was late autumn in Dalian, and the wind had already turned cold. Leaves swirled on the ground, making rustling sounds. There were few visitors in distant Labor Park. Occasionally someone jogged by in the distance. The sea breeze blew in from the east, carrying a salty, fishy smell.
I was about to turn and leave when I suddenly heard a sound. It was crying. I stopped walking. It wasn't the wind. Dalian is by the sea. When the wind is strong it howls. I know the sound of Dalian's wind. I lived there for over 10 years. This wasn't the wind. It was crying. The same crying I'd heard that night in 1993. Many people crying together. The sound was very sharp, very flat, with no ups and downs, like it was seeping up from beneath the ground. Not coming from inside the building, coming from beneath the ground. My first instinct was to run. But I didn't run. I stood there and listened for another minute. Then I got in the taxi, went to the airport, and flew back to Shenyang. I never went back to that building again.
Old Joe paused here for a while when he finished telling his story. I asked him, is that building still there?
It should still be there. I haven't checked since.
I asked, and those more than 500 skeletons beneath the building? Did anyone ever deal with them?
I never heard of anyone dealing with them. I later looked for that survey report in the Sports Commission archives. It was gone. Half of the documents about that building in the archives were missing. Maybe someone took them. Maybe they got lost when the archives were being organized. Maybe someone deliberately destroyed them. By the time I checked, there was nothing left.
I asked, what do you think that crying was? He was silent for a long time. He poured himself a glass of wine, downed it in one gulp, then set the glass on the table. He looked at me and said one sentence. I still remember that sentence to this day.
If you've lain in one place for over 100 years, no one knows you, no one remembers you, no one makes offerings to you. Your bones are mixed into cement, pressed beneath several floors of a building. Wouldn't you cry?
He paused and added, 500 people crying together, can you hear them? I can hear them. The story ends here. What do you think? New urban legend every day. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe. New urban legend every day.